struggle for the causes of liberation and freedom in Europe. And to be here to celebrate those who've struggled for another cause is equally special. To save rare, endangered and beautiful animals and their delicate environments that are so increasingly under threat around the world. Just as the people of Arnhem were confronted with a choice during the war of coming out in support of the right cause or remaining silent, so we are now confronted with a very different but also important choice of whether or not to save our animals and environment. I've often felt that one of the greatest hurdles we face as conservationists is that good people remain silent. Even when there is unavoidable evidence to show that forests are being clear-cut at an unsustainable rate, rapacious fisheries are emptying the oceans, our population growth is shockingly out of control, and the juggernaut of development and exploitation is burying the natural world under concrete. Yet faced as we are every day with a torrent of bad news about the environment, sometimes an overwhelming feeling of helplessness just descends upon us and paralyses us like rabbits in the headlights. It is often easier just to close one's eyes and ears and pretend that it's not happening, hoping that the problems will go away. But of course they don't, and our inaction only makes the situation worse. Which is why today is special, because we are here to celebrate 3 young people who have broken the mould. People who have dared to dream of a better world and who are fighting with the tools that they have at hand to save our planet, one species at a time. They are important because they are the doers and thinkers who are engaged in the field, who talk to the world about issues that concern all of us, but that 90% of the public don't even think about. And because they are young and passionate, they can ignite interest in others and focus the resulting attention where it is most needed by bringing real information to the table that can influence public opinion. In Africa, where I come from, people live so much closer to the earth than here in Europe. And the link between a healthy environment and human survival is blindingly obvious. There are many passionate young conservationists in Africa who are aware of this, but like seeds in parched earth, they simply lack the means to surge ahead. And sadly, for most of our politicians, the environment isn't even on the agenda. Even when they are aware of the issues, there is a crippling lack of political will that often translates into bad policy. In my lifetime alone, I've seen enormous change in Africa. There has been a huge increase in the assault on nature as a result of an expanding human population, which recently passed the 1 billionth mark. A new scramble for African resources has shifted the geopolitical goalposts, and business is booming, especially with China. Roads, railways and ports are opening up the continent as never before. Oil prospectors are muscling into protected areas like the Virunga Mountains and Kabale and Murchison Falls National Park in Uganda, and a flood of chemicals are being poured into the soil and dripping down into the water table in the hope of igniting a cultural revolution, an agricultural revolution. While, of course, development in Africa is desperately needed, it has to be sustainable. And in the rush to modernise, the natural world is being sacrificed at an alarming rate. I've spent my life at very close quarters with elephant conservation, and it epitomises the struggle we face with so many other endangered species. In 1989, an ivory trade ban was brought into place that stopped 2 terrible decades of ivory poaching. Up until 2010, there was a relative ceasefire, and we could all have been forgiven for thinking that the problem was solved. But in the last 2 years, poaching has begun to slide out of control again. In the area where my family work, in the north of Kenya in Samburu, out of the 50 large bull elephants that we know, only 10 remain. And a frightening number of adult females have been shot, leaving behind them herds of terrified youngsters without leadership. Of course, I'm sure many of you have also heard about this recent slaughter of elephants in Cameroon. These are just two sad examples of a spiralling situation that is reflected across the continent. And the reason for this awful regression seems to be due to a growing middle class in China who are simply unaware of the consequences of their buying ivory. Our lions in Kenya have also been hard hit, and their numbers have dropped from a high of 15,000 animals to less than 2,000 today, and we're losing them at a rate of about 100 a year. It's a classic case of habitat loss and resource competition, with lions being forced to find new prey as wildlife populations are denuded. Nomadic herders have exchanged their spears for an outlawed chemical called furadam, which they use to poison lions that kill their livestock. Other scavengers, birds, and even hippopotamuses have become part of the collateral damage. I just find it incredible to think that this iconic animal, that is such a symbol of Africa and so pivotal to our tourism, is being driven to the brink of extinction. I think the point to learn from this is that in conservation you can never give up. It's a lifetime vocation, and even when you think you've won, sometimes you haven't. But things are changing. Kenya is at the forefront of political reform, and with a new constitution that allows citizens to participate, the legislation is being amended, and it is a fantastic opportunity for conservationists to get involved. As with the Arab Spring, there are new forces at play that take us by surprise. The internet is a powerful tool for raising awareness and creating change in unexpected ways. And as access to technology seeps down through all levels of society, its ripples will spread and build into waves. With young African conservationists shifting their focus from activism to advocacy and joining hands with our government institutions, I do believe that things can get better. We've all been astonished by the rise of China as an economic superpower, and the stories of their consumption of the world's resources, which affect many endangered species, are legion. So a critical question for all of us is what Chinese attitudes will be in the future. At the moment, we see their interest in Africa as a threat, but it could be converted into a benefit because China has the ability to affect change. There's a huge lack of awareness in China about what happens when you buy endangered species, but attitudes are changing, and you can be certain that young Chinese won't think the same way as their parents. I wanted to give a quick example of how attitudes are changing for the better, even in my own backyard. Since July last year, 2 lionesses have come out of the park and they've based themselves around my house in a suburb in Nairobi. Instead of being shot on sight, as would have happened in the old gun-toting hunting days, a humane solution is being sought, even at some risks to the occupants of the suburb and to the grim amusement of our long-suffering Kenya Wildlife Service. Some of my neighbours, who are worried about their cattle, their dogs and their children, want the lions removed immediately to a distant park. But others seek out the traps that have been set by KWS on the quiet. And when nobody's looking, they pee all around them to impregnate the area with human scent to keep the big cats away. Personally, I love having the lions there, but I've had to cut the grass to within an inch of its life around my house to make sure they don't creep up on my children unexpectedly. The fact that 7 months down the line, the lionesses are still in our neighbourhood, and just a week ago, my father and I actually caught them on camera with a camera trap jumping over a gate, goes to show how tolerant people are and how clever these lions are at assimilating themselves into a human-dominated environment. So, Future for Nature's focus on supporting young conservationists is exactly right. We need fresh blood and new ideas. We need passion and idealism, and we need people who can explain how Facebook works. Each of our young winners today have emphasised the work they do with communities, which reflects a new understanding in conservation that people who live close to nature, without all the facilities of the modern world, are often the custodians of wildlife. Animals desperately need dispersal corridors and protected areas outside of national parks. And so it's essential to get local people on board, which is why conservationists today must take an interest in human welfare. Building the capacity of these people, enforcing law, and finding ways to tap into eco-friendly markets has to be part of the holistic way to save species, and our winners are showing us the way. There is a critical race underway to see whether or not attitudes can change in time to save the world's wildlife. And while there's potentially a huge amount of interest, it takes people like these young people here to act as catalysts and ignite the flame. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first of our winners. Ana Opoza comes from the Philippines, and she is not a typical candidate for this award, coming as she does from an artistic rather than a scientific background. She has such an irrepressible, bubbly personality that I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't just get on stage and start singing to you all. But today, we're not celebrating her talents as a performer. We're celebrating her exceptional efforts to raise awareness of marine issues and to create the first marine sanctuary for thresher sharks in the Philippines. Anna got into conservation by mistake, driven by her love of the ocean and her horror at seeing her beloved Philippine sea disappearing under a pile of garbage. She decided to take a stand and started writing letters to government. And every time she got rejected, she wrote again, until she started to get results. Elected in 2008 as one of the Philippine youth ambassadors to the ASEAN and what does ASEAN stand for? Southeast Asia and Japan, she visited 6 countries in 2 months to talk about environmental issues. Her star has risen ever since, and when you hear about her work, it is hard not to be impressed by her guts, drive, and leadership skills. And to see how taking a stand and speaking out really pays off. She's a brave and inspiring champion, and we hope that this award will help her springboard up to ever greater heights to continue to be a driving force in conservation. Anna.